You are listening to Radio Belvaspata, South Africa. You are listening to Radio Belvaspata, South Africa. This show is dedicated to those who live and love from the heart in infinite ways. In today's episode, we will discuss, share, gain insights, and get clarity on the wisdom and teachings of the mystic and seer Almin, as well as discover more about the miraculous healing modality called Belvaspata. Your host for this show is Paul.
The mysteries of the inner space. The longing for home that is the core grief for many comes from the masculine living with an external focus. Cut off from inner space, one is cut off from home. John O'Donoghue tells us that the search for meaning is really the search for the lost chord. When the lost chord is discovered by humankind, the discord in the world will be healed, and the symphony of the universe will come into complete harmony with itself. Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Paul, from a really cold and wet Johannesburg. We are absolutely freezing. I hope you are listening to us here in the Southern Hemisphere with your heater and fire burning strong, with a glass of something beautiful in your hand, hot tea and coffee, and something to munch for the next hour as you join us. Tonight's show is all about growing up with compassion and power. At the sound desk, we have Nico, as usual, doing a fine job, and he's monitoring our signal, etc., etc. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's great to have you with us this Thursday, and for the next hour, we'll be sharing a lot of processes, a lot of classes, some great music, and we'll have some time to spend together, of course. Last week, we discussed inner space. We discussed the masculine and the feminine. We discussed alchemy and using light and frequency through power and changing our perspective. You know, that feeling of overwhelm that I've been experiencing, and I'm sure many of you can really look at that as well, is just now beginning to give way to a new dynamic of anticipation, excitement, enthusiasm for things in a way. But it's built certainly on trust, faith, and sometimes just a sheer let's do this attitude, stumbling forward some days, stepping forward proudly and strongly the next onto the next paving stone as it uncovers and unfolds before us. The storm is certainly raging outside in South Africa. There's an inner alchemy all of its own going on within us as we adjust to our new roles, and this is, carrying through in terms of developing our compassion and power. One thing is most definitely happening as our perspectives mature. We are growing up. Spiritually, we certainly are. Whilst there's always, some form of process to work through, I suppose, resistance is futile. There's an ongoing pressure to transcend the obvious and to bring in a new life for each one of ourselves. It's showing in our dream time, in our everyday lives, and it's laying itself on top of the old programs and belief systems that are still trying to make themselves heard and seen. It's become our job to dissolve all of these processes through compassion and power for ourselves. And that's an interesting process because, we have to also look at these developments within that are going on in terms of our understandings, our perspectives. We have to really look at this aspect of compassion. And later on, there's a beautiful bit of Almin wisdom where she says that we have to play the different roles that are needed at any one particular time, even if we don't feel that we are those particular people. But Almin says that the feeling of overwhelm is an enslavement to linear time. And that came up this week on social media and some of the Facebook pages and wherever we get this from. And I really sat back for a while, and I had to put the proverbial finger onto the forehead and go, this is very interesting, because if you think that you're not working with any of these dynamics, one certainly learns that one is. And I know the last 2 to 3 months, there's been this incredible feeling of overwhelm and not being able to cope. And just before this came up, that this particular comment came up, I was saying to Nico that feeling of being overwhelmed is now gone. So I'm just thinking that the inner masculine and inner feminine and all these inner and outer space process that we certainly are working on is really just dissolving. And as it dissolves, then everything all goes along the way. And it just feels like I'm stepping into this new dynamic. I'm very excited about it. But there's still all of these other processes that you have to work through. And again, there could be opposites that are having to come together in order to merge and then dissolve, so that we create the alchemy of transfiguration. And I can see all of that going on. So how do you live? In trust and hope? Or is there a multitude of experiences going on? Let's talk about that tonight. But let's start off with some great music. It's from Lisa Gerard. Love her music to absolute bits. It's called The Storm. And this is taken from her official music video. See you on the other side. And there we were listening to The Storm featuring Lisa Gerard. Beautiful amount of work she has to share on YouTube as well, so go listen. Elmine talks about in the changing face of compassion, the work that we have to do, and this is very much structured within the teachings of the Belvaspatar modality. She says that in the previous cycle, compassion or love, which is the desire to include, was the compelling attraction of light workers to those who represented illusion or underdeveloped light. They wanted to help, to save, to ease the suffering where pain prodded others to change. It was inconceivable to abandon those who were on the treadmill of illusion and its accompanying chaos and pain. It was a requirement that the more light we had, the more our responsibility to reach out, to assist and include in our lives others who had lost their way. Workers of dysfunctionality were equally compelled towards us. In fact, they came in droves until we were left wondering whether we had stumbled into a madhouse by mistake. We didn't have to look for them. They sought us out, compelled by an inner knowledge that we had something they wanted, something long forgotten. Was it integrity or peace of mind, or was it the power that accompanies perception? Whatever they found attractive in us changed when the previous cycle concluded, because the old laws of attraction have reversed. In the physical and with energy, opposites no longer attract. In fact, they repel. If we therefore stubbornly cling to the desire to physically include light retarders in our lives in order to help them, their hostility towards us will increase. They must reject us. They are not abandoned, however. In fact, great assistance will flood their lives as we now study ourselves in mirrors of sameness. This is how it works. Number one, with matter or physical process and energy, opposites repel and like or sameness attracts. In physicality, light workers now refuse to bring dysfunctionality into their environments. Have you noticed that for yourself? As they embrace those of like mind, their mutual support increases their joy, peace, light, and love. Light retarders can no longer feed off light workers' energy and must grow on their own. They congregate with others who are just as dishonest and scrupulous and vicious as they are. This increases their discomfort as they have to face themselves in the mirrors of others having the same qualities. Number two, with light and frequency, which is love, opposites attract and sameness then repels. This means that the more we increase our light and love by finding the joy of surrounding ourselves with a new light family, the more light those who are in darkness receive. Light workers often used to speak of sending someone light, but if that someone dwelled in darkness, it didn't work. Now it will. And we don't have to send anything. It is automatically transmitted. As we simply create a joyous life, the joy rushes to the place of least joy to comfort the crying child of someone who has lost their way. And the third way that this works is that there is another form of energy called heart energy, and this was activated by Mother in the new creation. Heart energy always exceeds a being's quotient of light and frequency by a small margin. She did this so that its properties of like energies attracting and opposite energies repelling would be more dominant. Our primary responsibility is now to make sure we live a path with heart, one that fulfills and uplifts us. In this way, we render the highest service to all of life. In this next short audio that we've got coming up, it talks about the false promises of the soul in the ascension realms. This was a live comment recorded by comments made by the seer in her Ohio retreat last year. I know there's another one coming up in July, I think it is. But let's just see how this resonates with where we are at this moment. It's a 6-minute audio clip in class. She talks about the false promises of the soul and the ascension realms. And basically we're playing this just so that we can look at our own understanding and our own pathway and process as we begin to dissolve that which no longer serves us.
To keep the movement going, because you can see the lengths that the universe goes to make sure there's movement. And we explain this that you need that movement in a dream. We're in a dream. So the movement is there. How it has been done is the competing for the currency of the universe, which is in energy. Everything competes for energy, just like all the plants in the forest compete for the sun. So the energy of life, when your awareness is focused in this part of the dream, the soul worlds tries to lure you to the soul world. I never understood this. Then I held a week-long retreat, a retreat that was held in Newport, and I said we have to study this issue of the dream time. What I uncovered, I slept with them, we worked nights and days. They gave me permission to follow the dream bodies into their personal dream time, which I did. I learned so much. I had missed so much. I didn't realize that the soul, which slumbers in the body during the day, is the exact same dream body that goes into the dream time at night. I didn't understand that there's interference from beings in the dream that make their way into sleeping people to interfere with their lives. I didn't understand that there was as much attempt to control humanity in the dream time as there is in the physical. So it was an amazing experience throughout the week. We all had many miracles. And during that, I started to understand something that I always knew. And that's that when people ask their higher self for permission to sneeze, I mean, some people don't even wear their clothes by their own volition. They ask their higher self. So I just knew that those people's lives were a mess. And in general, they were in debt, they had no friends, they had bankruptcy, they had a car accident. I'm going, and you still get your advice from your higher self? I can't believe this. And the highest self, same story. Those people's lives were clearly lacking in many things that had to do with thriving. So I started to understand why once I had this very mystical retreat with this group of women. Because to get the movement in the dream of creation, they compete for your presence because it adds energy to them. Everything wants energy. So these realms, death wants you to give up on life, higher self. It tells you what to do, but it's not good decisions. So higher self wants you to ascend. What does death promise you? It's such a struggle to be alive. Give up. Just come my way. I'll give you rest. It doesn't, but that's what it promises. And pain in your body, no pain over here. Come this way. So people give up their lives. And what does ascension promise? This is heaven. When you come here, you've arrived. No more struggle. Come here, we'll provide you with heaven. But one thing, do exactly what we say. And if you step out of the box, you will tumble back down into rebirth, and you will know you fell out of heaven. You do exactly what we say. You don't laugh too loudly. You don't laugh all your laughter. You don't cry all your tears. And you walk in holiness and sacredness. All the story about holy, sacred things, all of that comes from that level. They have programmed us to believe in churches and be good, and then you go to heaven and the whole thing. It's a conspiracy as much as the soul conspiracy, as much as the physical conspiracy. So this is the issue of ascension. And New Age teachers everywhere, just ascend and you've got it made. Well, excuse me, you can't stay anywhere because the pain of stagnation will push you back out. So you can either keep repeating these cycles Or you can transcend them by moving into a whole other reality, which is what we're doing here. There is no point of arrival. There is only the eternal journey that, per your attitude, can be a grand adventure and a joyous one. But you have to change the perspective. It depends entirely on your perspective. You know, yes, you don't need to have the hardship anymore. But are you still going to manifest that because you're addicted to tension? It's your choice. But it can get better and better as you walk along, and there's no arrival. It's eternal.
And there we were listening to the Seer Almeen as she talked about the false promises of the soul and the ascension realms just a whole year ago already. So the poet, author and healer, Rainer Name, tells us, "You're allowed to leave any story you don't find yourself in. You're allowed to leave any story you don't love yourself in. You're allowed to leave a city that has dimmed your light instead of making you shine brighter. You're allowed to pack all your bags and start over somewhere else, and you're allowed to redefine the meaning of your life. You're allowed to quit the job you hate, even if the world tells you not to. And you're allowed to search for something that makes you look forward to tomorrow and to the rest of your life. You're allowed to leave someone you love if they're treating you poorly. You're allowed to put yourself first if you're settling, and you're allowed to walk away when you tried over and over again, but nothing has changed. You're allowed to let toxic friends go. You're allowed to surround yourself with love and people who encourage and nurture you. You're allowed to pick up the kind of energy you need in your life. You're allowed to forgive yourself for your biggest and smallest mistakes, and you're allowed to be kind to yourself. You're allowed to look in the mirror and actually like the person you see. You're allowed to set yourself free from your own expectations. We sometimes look at leaving as a bad thing or associate it with giving up or quitting. But sometimes leaving is the best thing you can do for yourself. Leaving allows you to change directions, to start over, to rediscover yourself and the world. Leaving sometimes saves you from staying stuck in the wrong place with the wrong people. Leaving opens a new door for change, for growth, opportunities, and redemption. You always have the choice to leave until you find where you belong and what makes you happy. You're even allowed to leave the old you behind and reinvent yourself. Isn't that beautiful and just so empowering? And to understand we have permission to do whatever we need to do in order to create that happiness for ourselves. So let's look now a little bit about how these things come to be. The Seer is going to give us another short class here called Realms of the Unseen. It's called The Thinning of the Veils, and literally just a beautiful explanation and understanding of as everything turns into this absolute amazing state of oneness, and all separation then dissolves as we begin to subtly pick up these influences and experiences, and we begin to take them on board and begin to live them and create that reality out of it. It's just so beautiful. Here we are, the thinning of the veils with the Seer.
Because the veils between realms are thinning, and because linear time as an actual reality in the cosmos has collapsed. You see, linear time was the movement of awareness. But in August of 2006, a most remarkable event happened. The trillions and trillions of spirals of awareness that moved through space for eons of time shattered due to an event that occurred, and awareness ceased to move across space. It became inert, spreading itself like butter across toast across the cosmos. When the movement of awareness particles ceased, linear time ceased. The past and the future are now. When that happened, and the veils started to thin as the Earth ascended on her way since February of 2005, another extraordinary event took place. Ancient